My family held a reunion without inviting me, so I showed up unannounced and discovered a secret blood relation they'd tried to bury forever. I'm a 32-year-old guy, and I come from what you might call a classic big family. Growing up, my family was always one of those that treated gatherings like a sport: birthday parties, anniversaries, random Sunday lunches. You name it, we celebrated it. If someone sneezed too loudly, we probably threw a barbecue. That was the vibe, and for most of my life I was in the thick of it. But somewhere along the way things got complicated. It started small, as these things often do, some disagreements here and there with my parents. Nothing major at first, just your typical arguments over life choices, how I was too independent or not traditional enough. My cousins chimed in now and then, making things worse, as cousins do. Then came the fallout over inheritance. My parents sold a piece of property, and I had the audacity to suggest that the proceeds should be split fairly between all their kids. Let's just say that didn't go over well. That conversation spiraled into accusations, yelling, and me being branded as the ungrateful one. From there, it was like a slow bleed. Invitations to family dinners started coming less often. Texts went unanswered. Eventually, I realized that my name was quietly missing from group chats where all the planning happened. It was subtle at first. I'd see photos on Facebook or Instagram of family events I hadn't even heard about. A part of me wanted to shrug it off, but it stung every time. It didn't help that I live in the same town as most of my family, so it's not like they had to go out of their way to include me. They just chose not to. I should have seen it coming, honestly, but the final nail in the coffin was the big reunion announcement. My family hadn't done a proper reunion in years, and when I saw the posts about it, I was actually excited for a second. A full weekend at a rented venue with everyone together again: uncles, aunts, cousins, even the distant relatives who usually only show up for funerals. It sounded great. Then I realized something. No one had invited me. At first I thought it was a mistake. I combed through my emails, checked my mailbox, scrolled through group chats, even the ones I'd been ghosted in. Nothing. The invite had gone out to literally everyone but me. I found out about the reunion because my cousin posted a screenshot of the event details in one of the family group chats. She even captioned it with something like, "Can't wait to see everyone." Everyone but me, apparently. I brought it up to a couple of people, my siblings mostly. They gave me these half-hearted excuses like, "Oh, it must have been an oversight," or "I'm sure it wasn't personal." But the truth was pretty clear. I wasn't wanted there. Maybe it was because of the inheritance fight. Maybe it was because my parents still couldn't forgive me for standing up to them. Whatever the reason, I wasn't going to sit around and let them pretend I didn't exist. So, I decided I'd go anyway. If they weren't going to invite me, I'd just show up. It wasn't like they could legally stop me from attending. It's not like it was at someone's private home. They'd rented out a banquet hall at a local resort. Besides, I'm still part of the family, even if they're trying to pretend otherwise. I started planning. If things got ugly, I'd leave and stay with my friend Dan, who lived nearby. I also ran the idea past my fiancée. She wasn't thrilled about it, to say the least. Her exact words were something along the lines of, "Do you really want to walk into a room full of people who clearly don't want you there?" She wasn't wrong, but at the same time, it felt like I had to do this. It wasn't about revenge. Okay, maybe a little bit. It was about not letting them erase me. Leading up to the reunion, I couldn't help but obsess over the details. I scrolled through the family group chat more times than I care to admit, dissecting every post, every photo. The more I looked, the more obvious it became that my absence was a joke to some of them. There was this one comment from a cousin about how certain people couldn't handle family drama. I knew it was about me. I could feel it in my gut. As the date got closer, I started to waver. Maybe I shouldn't go. Maybe it'd just make things worse. But then I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to keep the peace, trying to fit in with a family that didn't seem to want me anymore. If this reunion was going to be the hill I died on, so be it. The day before the reunion, I packed a bag. My fiancée asked me one last time if I was sure about this. I told her I'd leave if things got out of hand. Deep down, though, I knew that walking out wasn't an option. If I left, it would just prove them right. They could pat themselves on the back and say, "See, he can't handle it." When the morning of the reunion arrived, I stood outside the venue, my heart pounding like a drum. I hadn't even walked in yet, but I could already feel the tension. This was it. I wasn't just crashing a party, I was walking straight into the lion's den. The reunion was in full swing when I arrived. From the parking lot, I could already hear the low hum of chatter and the occasional burst of laughter. The venue was a large banquet hall with a glass entrance, and through the windows I could see clusters of my family scattered across the room. Kids were running around, adults were holding plates stacked high with food, and everyone seemed comfortable. It was like a scene from a movie, except I wasn't part of it. I walked in, trying to look as casual as possible. The room was buzzing, and no one noticed me at first. I grabbed a drink from the refreshment table near the entrance, scanning the crowd for a familiar face. It didn't take long for someone to notice me, though. A cousin, let's call her Lisa, spotted me from across the room. Her eyes went wide, and she froze for a second before quickly turning and whispering to the group she was standing with. That's when I saw one of them peel off and head straight toward my parents. The ripple effect was almost immediate. Faces started turning toward me, conversations slowed, and the energy in the room shifted. A few people gave me polite nods or half smiles, but most just stared, unsure of what to do. My parents were across the room, talking to some relatives, but I could see the moment the message reached them. My mom stiffened, and my dad turned to look directly at me. For a split second, I thought they might ignore me, but then they started making their way over. I didn't wait for them to come to me. I figured if I was going to do this, I might as well do it on my terms. I walked deeper into the room, past the appetizer table and into the main gathering area. Conversations were resuming now, but the mood was still tense. A few younger cousins waved or said hi as I passed, but most of the older relatives avoided eye contact. My parents intercepted me near the center of the room. My mom looked more shocked than angry, but my dad was already scowling. They didn't waste time asking why I was there. I stayed calm and told them I wasn't invited, but I had every right to be there. This wasn't some private, intimate event. It was a family reunion, and I was family, whether they liked it or not. The tension was thick, and I could feel the eyes of half the room on us. My parents didn't yell, but their tone was sharp, accusing me of crashing the event and causing unnecessary drama. I pointed out the obvious. I wouldn't have needed to show up uninvited if I'd been treated like part of the family in the first place. The conversation started heating up, and I noticed my siblings nearby, watching but staying silent. One of my cousins, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, came up and whispered that they admired my guts for showing up. They said they agreed with me, but couldn't get involved. I appreciated the support, even if it was quiet, but it only added to the feeling of being isolated in a room full of people who were supposed to be my family. The argument with my parents dragged on. Old grievances started surfacing, things that had nothing to do with the reunion. My dad brought up the inheritance dispute, claiming I disrespected the family by questioning their decisions. My mom chimed in, saying I'd been distant for years, as if that was entirely my fault. It felt like a laundry list of everything they thought I'd done wrong, and I realized they weren't just angry about today, they were angry about everything. In the middle of this, my fiancée arrived. She walked in quietly and spotted me almost immediately. She didn't join the argument but stayed nearby, watching and offering silent support. It was a relief to see her there, even if it didn't change the situation. At some point, my aunt, who'd always been one of my closest allies, pulled me aside. She didn't yell, but she made it clear she thought I'd made a mistake by coming. She said it wasn't worth the trouble and that I should have just let it go. I told her I didn't have a choice. Staying away would have meant accepting that I didn't belong, and I wasn't ready to do that. The night kept escalating. My dad's voice got louder, and I could see people around us pretending not to listen while clearly eavesdropping. Finally, he accused me of showing up just to cause a scene, saying I wanted attention. That was my breaking point. I wasn't about to let him twist this into something it wasn't. I told him I didn't need their approval, and walked away before things could get even worse. Outside, the air was cool, and the noise from the hall was muffled. I leaned against the wall, trying to collect myself. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from one of my cousins. They said they were sorry things went down like that, and that they wished they could have spoken up, but didn't want to get dragged into the drama. I wasn't sure what to do next, stay or leave. Before I could decide, another relative came out. They didn't say much, just suggested it might be better if I left before things escalated further. It wasn't what I wanted to hear, but I appreciated their honesty. I stayed, though. Leaving felt like admitting defeat, and I wasn't ready to give them that satisfaction. I headed back inside, determined to stick it out, no matter how awkward or tense it got. When I walked back into the banquet hall, it was clear things hadn't cooled down in my absence. The energy in the room felt different, tenser, quieter. People were gathered in smaller groups now, heads leaning in close as they whispered. I caught a few sideways glances in my direction, but no one said anything outright, at least not yet. I made my way to the food table, grabbing a plate to give myself something to do. As I piled on some appetizers, I couldn't help but overhear snippets of conversations around me. One group was discussing how certain people didn't know when to stay away. Another voice mentioned my name outright, followed by laughter. It was clear this wasn't just about me showing up uninvited. They'd been talking about me for a while, probably weeks. At one point, I passed by a table where a couple of cousins were sitting. One of them, the loud, opinionated type, made a comment loud enough for me to hear, something about how some people just thrive on drama. It wasn't subtle. I stopped, looked directly at them, and they quickly looked away. It was frustrating, but I wasn't about to start another confrontation in the middle of the room. Then came the first real showdown. Another cousin, let's call him Justin, approached me near the drinks table. Justin's always been one of the more vocal supporters of my parents, and it didn't take him long to launch into a rant. He accused me of being selfish, of ruining the reunion, of making everything about me. The way he spoke, you'd think I'd crashed someone's wedding, not a family gathering. A small crowd started to form around us, everyone pretending not to watch while obviously listening in. I stayed calm, telling him I wasn't there to start trouble, but Justin wouldn't let it go. He brought up the inheritance drama from years ago, twisting the story to make it sound like I tried to rob my own parents. I corrected him, pointing out that I'd only ever asked for fairness, but it didn't matter. He was loud, angry, and determined to paint me as the villain. My parents, meanwhile, had retreated to the other side of the room. They weren't saying anything directly, but I noticed my mom shooting me pointed looks while my dad talked animatedly to a group of relatives. It was obvious they were steering clear of me while still making sure their side of the story was heard. Every so often, I'd catch a relative glancing my way after talking to my dad, their expression shifting to something colder. Even the family members who had whispered their support earlier were keeping their distance now. I couldn't really blame them. Justin's outburst had drawn a line in the sand, and no one wanted to get caught on the wrong side of it. Still, it stung. My siblings were nowhere to be found. I spotted them once or twice, but they made themselves scarce whenever I was nearby. It was like they decided the safest option was to stay neutral by staying invisible. These were the same siblings I'd grown up with, who I'd been close to for years. Seeing them avoid me like I was some kind of ticking time bomb was probably the hardest part of the whole night. My fiancée tried to convince me to leave. She'd been patient up until now, staying on the sidelines and letting me handle things my way, but it was clear she was uncomfortable. She said staying would only make things worse, and maybe she was right. But I couldn't shake the feeling that leaving would be like admitting defeat. I told her I just needed a little more time. As the evening dragged on, the tension reached its breaking point. My dad made a passive-aggressive comment loud enough for me to hear, something about family gatherings being better when they're peaceful. I ignored it at first, but then he followed up with another dig, and I couldn't stay quiet anymore. We ended up having a heated exchange in front of half the room, rehashing old arguments that clearly weren't going to be resolved anytime soon. My mom tried to step in, but it was clear she wasn't trying to mediate, she was just trying to shut me down. By the time the argument fizzled out, I was exhausted. My fiancée pulled me aside and told me we should go. She was right. The night wasn't going to get any better, and staying longer would only give my parents more ammunition. I finally agreed, grabbing my things and heading for the door. As we left, I noticed a few people pulling out their phones. Sure enough, by the time I got home, social media was buzzing. Posts about the reunion had gone up, and while no one mentioned me by name, the comments made it clear they were talking about the drama. Some people were disappointed, others were laughing at the situation. It was humiliating. Later that night, a few cousins messaged me privately. They said they admired me for standing my ground, but they couldn't say anything publicly without causing more drama. I appreciated their words, but it didn't make up for the fact that the night had been a disaster. As I lay in bed, scrolling through the posts and replaying the evening in my head, I started to regret going. Maybe crashing the reunion wasn't the right move after all. But then I thought about how they'd tried to erase me, how they'd excluded me from something I had every right to be part of. That wasn't okay, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Still, one thing was clear, the fallout from tonight wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. After the reunion, the fallout started almost immediately. By the next morning, I woke up to several missed calls and texts from people I hadn't heard from in months, mostly cousins and distant relatives. Some messages were vague, like, "Crazy night, huh?" Others jumped straight to the point, "Why did you even show up if you weren't invited?" It was clear word had spread fast, and opinions were already forming. It didn't take long for the family to split into two camps. On one side were the people who thought I had crossed a line by showing up uninvited, saying I had disrupted the reunion and caused unnecessary drama. On the other side were the quiet supporters, the ones who agreed with me, but wouldn't say it out loud. A few cousins reached out privately, admitting they thought I was treated unfairly. One of them even confessed they skipped the reunion entirely because they didn't want to deal with the tension of knowing I wasn't invited. Meanwhile, my siblings stayed silent. I hadn't heard a word from any of them since the reunion, not even a simple text to ask if I was okay. It stung more than I wanted to admit. We used to be close, but now it felt like they didn't want to get involved in the family drama, even if it meant leaving me to deal with the fallout alone. I spotted one of my brothers commenting on a social media post about the reunion, laughing along with a cousin's joke about the uninvited guest. It wasn't directed at me, but it was hard not to read between the lines. My parents, on the other hand, were not staying quiet. I heard from several people that they had been telling their version of the story to anyone who would listen. According to them, I had shown up just to make a scene, stirring up trouble for attention. They conveniently left out the part where they excluded me in the first place. Their narrative seemed to be gaining traction too. A few relatives who used to be friendly started keeping their distance, not responding to my messages or giving me short, dismissive replies. Things got worse when a passive-aggressive post popped up on Facebook. One of my aunts who had been at the reunion wrote something along the lines of, "Family events should bring people together, not tear them apart." Some people just don't understand that. The comment section quickly filled with thinly veiled jabs about knowing your place and respecting boundaries. They didn't mention my name, but everyone knew who they were talking about. Against my better judgment, I made a post of my own. I didn't call anyone out directly, but I wrote something like, "Funny how some people love to rewrite history when they're the ones who started the problem." It was vague, but it didn't take long for the drama to spill over. Relatives started arguing in the comments, and one even messaged me, saying I should take the post down before things got worse. I ignored them. My fiancée wasn't thrilled with my decision to engage online. She told me I was only giving my family more fuel to twist the narrative. She suggested I block the toxic relatives and focus on moving forward, but it wasn't that simple. Every time I thought about letting it go, I remembered how they had tried to erase me from the reunion entirely. Letting it slide felt like letting them win. Then, out of nowhere, I got a private message from a distant relative, someone I'd barely spoken to over the years. They apologized for how I'd been treated and said they thought my parents were out of line. They weren't close enough to the situation to make a difference, but their message was a small reminder that not everyone in the family was against me. But just as I started feeling a bit better, I learned something that knocked the wind out of me. My aunt, the same one who used to be my biggest ally, had been talking behind my back. A cousin let it slip during a phone call, telling me my aunt thought I'd embarrassed myself by coming to the reunion, and that my actions were childish. It hurt more than it should have. She'd been one of the few people I thought I could count on, but now it seemed even she had turned on me. After a few days of stewing, I decided to write a letter to my parents. I laid everything out: the hurt, the exclusion, the constant feeling of being the family outcast. I didn't hold back, but I also made it clear I wanted to find a way forward. I delivered the letter by hand, leaving it in their mailbox, but I didn't hear anything back. Frustrated by the silence, I tried reaching out to my siblings. I called each of them one by one, asking why they hadn't said anything. The conversations were awkward and stilted. One of them admitted they didn't want to get involved, saying it was easier to stay neutral. Another outright avoided the question, changing the subject every time I brought it up. It was like talking to strangers. In the middle of all this, a younger cousin reached out. They told me they'd been feeling alienated from the family too and admired me for standing up for myself. They suggested we meet up to talk, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't completely alone. At my fiancé's urging, I booked a therapy session. I spent an hour unpacking the reunion, the fallout, and the years of resentment that had built up. The therapist encouraged me to think about boundaries and whether maintaining ties with certain family members was worth the pain. For the first time, I started seriously considering cutting off the toxic parts of my family for good. Weeks after I delivered my letter to my parents, their response finally came, but not in the way I'd hoped. Instead of a thoughtful reply or even a phone call, they sent me a short email. The message wasn't kind. They accused me of making everything about myself, disrupting the family, and dragging up old issues that should have been left in the past. It felt like a slap in the face, but at this point, I wasn't surprised. What did surprise me was the call I got later that week from one of my siblings. Out of the blue, they reached out, apologizing for staying silent during all the fallout. They admitted they had been afraid to take sides because of pressure from our parents. Apparently, my parents had been telling everyone to keep their distance from me, framing me as the one stirring up trouble. My siblings said they felt stuck, not wanting to upset anyone but also not agreeing with how things were being handled. That's when they dropped the bombshell. My parents' grudge against me wasn't just about the inheritance fight or my decision to stand up to them, it went deeper. Years ago, during a family financial dispute, my parents believed I'd acted selfishly and undermined them. This wasn't something they'd ever told me directly. I had no idea they were holding on to this resentment, and hearing it now felt like being blindsided by a truck. I pressed my sibling for details, but they didn't know much. All they could say was that it involved money, and that my parents had interpreted my actions as prioritizing myself over the family. I hung up the phone in shock, replaying every financial decision I'd made that could have caused this. Nothing came to mind that would justify years of tension. Determined to get answers, I reached out to a few extended family members who might know more. Most of them were vague, either genuinely clueless or unwilling to get involved. A couple confirmed bits and pieces of the story, enough to suggest there was some truth to it. One even admitted that my parents had been quietly nursing this grudge for years, using it as a reason to justify keeping me at arm's length. My fiancée, as always, was my rock through this. She listened as I vented about the situation and encouraged me to confront my parents directly. She said it was time to stop playing the guessing game and demand some clarity. I knew she was right, but part of me hesitated. Confronting them could go one of two ways. It might bring closure, or it could blow everything up even further. Feeling overwhelmed, I made the mistake of taking my frustration to social media. I posted something cryptic about finding out the truth behind years of family drama and left it at that. Within hours, my inbox started filling up. Some relatives messaged me out of curiosity, asking what I discovered. Others sent not-so-subtle warnings to stop airing private matters online. Then came the backlash. One cousin, who'd been quietly supportive until now, turned on me completely. They called me out publicly, accusing me of stirring up drama, making things harder for everyone. It didn't take long to figure out that they'd been feeding information to my parents. The betrayal stung, but at this point, I wasn't surprised. It seemed like every time I thought I had someone in my corner, they flipped sides. I took all of this to my next therapy session, laying out the new revelations and trying to make sense of it all. My therapist pointed out that my parents' grudge likely wasn't just about the financial dispute. It was about years of built-up resentment and miscommunication. She encouraged me to focus on setting boundaries and deciding what kind of relationship, if any, I wanted with them moving forward. After thinking it over, I decided to write another letter to my parents. This one was less about calling them out and more about finding a path forward. I acknowledged the hurt on both sides and expressed a genuine desire to move past the animosity. I didn't hold my breath for a positive response, but I knew I had to at least try. To my surprise, they replied fairly quickly. The tone of their email was cold, but they agreed to meet in person to talk. I was cautious but hopeful. This could be the start of something better, or it could be another disaster. Either way, I knew I had to go through with it. One of my siblings, the same one who'd reached out earlier, offered to mediate the meeting. They said they wanted to make sure things stayed civil and didn't spiral into another shouting match. I accepted their help, knowing it would be better to have someone there who could keep the conversation on track. I started preparing for the meeting, jotting down key points I wanted to bring up. I wanted to be clear about my perspective without letting emotions take over. My fiancée helped me organize my thoughts, even role-playing some potential scenarios. She decided not to attend, reasoning that it was something I needed to handle on my own. The date for the meeting was set, and as it approached, I found myself equal parts nervous and ready. After years of tension, misunderstandings, and outright hostility, it was finally time to face my parents head-on. Whether it brought resolution or not, I knew one thing: I wasn't backing down. The meeting with my parents was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at a neutral location, a quiet cafe just outside town. My sibling, who had volunteered to mediate, arrived first and grabbed a table in the corner. The atmosphere felt calm, but the tension was already brewing beneath the surface. My parents showed up a few minutes later, their expressions unreadable but serious. No one wasted time on small talk. We sat down, and the air between us was heavy. Once we ordered coffee, my sibling opened the conversation, keeping their tone measured. They started by reminding everyone why we were there, to talk, not to fight. My parents were the first to speak. My dad leaned forward, his tone clipped, as he brought up the financial dispute that had apparently started all of this. According to him, I'd acted selfishly by not supporting a decision they made years ago about selling a family asset. He claimed it wasn't just about money, but about loyalty and respect. My mom chimed in, saying they'd felt dismissed and disrespected by the way I'd handled things back then. I listened carefully, letting them lay everything out. When they were finished, I explained my side. I told them that at the time, I had no idea they'd interpreted my actions as selfish or disrespectful. To me, I'd simply been trying to offer a fair suggestion, but I never intended to undermine them. I pointed out that they never communicated their feelings to me directly, which left me in the dark about how much resentment had built up. My sibling nodded, backing me up, and pointed out that years of miscommunication had likely made things worse. The conversation went back and forth for a while, with my parents holding on to their frustration and me trying to address it without getting defensive. My sibling played an important role, stepping in whenever the discussion started veering off course. At one point, my dad admitted that while my actions had hurt them, they had also let their anger fester for too long, turning it into something much bigger than it needed to be. My mom agreed, though reluctantly, saying they'd probably handled things poorly by avoiding the issue instead of addressing it head-on. This was the breakthrough I hadn't expected. For the first time, it felt like we were finally getting somewhere. I apologized for any unintentional harm I'd caused, making it clear that my goal was never to alienate or disrespect them. But I also took the opportunity to set some boundaries. I told them that while I wanted to move forward, I wouldn't tolerate being excluded from family events or treated like an outsider again. If we were going to rebuild our relationship, it needed to be based on mutual respect. Their response was hesitant. My dad muttered an apology, but it lacked the weight I was hoping for. My mom nodded along, but her body language suggested she wasn't entirely ready to let go of her grievances. Still, they both agreed to try and keep the lines of communication open moving forward. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. The meeting ended on a cautiously positive note. My sibling and I stayed behind for a few minutes after my parents left. They told me they were proud of how I handled the conversation and promised to help me navigate things with the rest of the family. Over the next few weeks, they became an unexpected ally, reaching out regularly to check in and even speaking up on my behalf in family group chats. As I worked on rebuilding trust with my parents, I also focused on strengthening my relationships with the supportive family members who had stuck by me. Some of my cousins reached out to meet for coffee or lunch, expressing their frustration with how things had been handled. Slowly but surely, I began to feel like I wasn't as isolated as I'd thought. At the same time, I let go of the relationships that weren't serving me. I unfollowed the toxic relatives on social media, refusing to engage with their passive-aggressive posts or comments. Instead, I started sharing positive updates about my life, pictures of my fiancé and me, milestones we'd achieved, and even little moments of joy. Reclaiming my narrative felt empowering, and it was clear from the messages I received that others noticed the change too. Therapy became a cornerstone of this new chapter. My sessions helped me understand how my family dynamics had shaped so many aspects of my life. I learned to focus on what I could control, my boundaries, my mental health, and my relationships with the people who truly cared about me. As part of this fresh start, my fiancé and I decided to create our own traditions. We began hosting small gatherings with friends and family members who genuinely supported us. These get-togethers were stress-free and filled with laughter, a stark contrast to the tense, obligation-driven events of my childhood. It felt good to celebrate with people who wanted to be there. My relationship with my parents remained fragile but functional. We exchanged the occasional text or phone call, and while things weren't perfect, they were better than before. I knew it would take time to fully repair the damage, but I was okay with that. For now, I was focused on moving forward, prioritizing my own happiness, and surrounding myself with people who valued and respected me. This wasn't the resolution I'd imagined at the start of all this, but it was enough. I didn't need the approval of my entire family to feel whole. I just needed to know that I'd done my part to make things right and that, moving forward, I was choosing peace over conflict. A new chapter had begun, and for the first time in years, it felt like I was finally writing my own story.